So we tell me when we're live.
We are live.
And right now we're starting. Good morning. Today is Thursday, February 9th, 2023. It's 2 minutes after 9. And this is a meeting at Senate Natural Resources and Energy. Today we're resuming work on Bill S5, also known as Affordable Heat Act. And our first guest is Mr. Crowley. You probably chair of the Sierra Club Energy Committee. So good morning and thank you again for your patience in coming back when testimony ran long a prior day. And I'm guessing you sent this on to Jude?
I have, yes.
Okay, great. So we can, for anyone interested in Mr. Who's watching and is interested in Mr. Crowley's presentation, you can find that posted on our committee webpage. So good morning, and the floor is yours. We're starting a little late, so we're going to go the full half hour.
Very good. Well, thank you for having me, Chairman Bray and Senators. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Stephen Crowley. I'm Vice Chair of the Vermont Sierra Club chapter and Energy Chair of the chapter. Our organization is an environmental advocacy organization with over 1 million members nationwide. Our Vermont chapter, chartered 30 years ago, has nearly 10,000 members and supporters all over the state. We've been engaged in Vermont issues ranging from wilderness preservation, water resource protection, waste and toxics, air pollution, environmental justice, transportation, and the climate crisis. It's those last two that occupy our focus today. I serve as our chapter's energy chair, and I previously served as the Sierra's Northeast Regional Vice President, coordinating energy policy among our chapters from Pennsylvania to Maritime Canada. And for years I served as chair of our, and for 4 years I served as chair of our national climate campaign, focusing on both national strategy and state level policy. In addition to this, in my career as a science teacher, I've studied, taught courses, and presented at professional conferences on topics ranging from energy policy, climate change, system dynamics modeling, and so on. So we look at the Affordable Heat Act here from 3 perspectives. The top priority for us is equity. We need to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table. We recognize that the disproportionate exposure some Vermonters have to both the climate crisis itself and the measures we undertake in response. Second, of course, is our response to the climate emergency in which we find ourselves, indeed, which we have brought upon ourselves. And thirdly, directly relevant in our thoughts about the Affordable Heat Act, is that other challenge, the biodiversity crisis, or the words of author Elizabeth Kohlberg, the 6th extinction. And we'll get to that when we talk about biofilms. Vermont Sierra Club has concerns and improvements we'd like to see addressed in S5. We commend its purpose and appreciate the creativity and enormous effort that have gone into tackling this very important sector of work. We also recognize significant improvements since last year. The inclusion of the reliance on bioenergy as a solution, though, with all of its drawbacks, make it impossible to be fully on board. At the same time, we recognize that it's imperative that we get going. Before I jump into a number of specific observations and suggestions about S5, I'll state in general terms our concerns about bioenergy. I think this repeats some of what you heard yesterday. The processes that create bioenergy fuels are complex and rapidly changing, so accounting for the greenhouse gas or ecosystem impacts is challenging. Every source, not just every type of fuel, has a distinct set of conditions and impacts. Biofuels are part of a global market from which our Vermont portion is inseparable. As this market grows, and it's growing rapidly, the land used to grow bioenergy crops is commonly land that's been used for food, has been part of important carbon sequestering and biodiversity supporting forests. The loss of acreage has critical human consequences as well, stressing food supplies and threatening the forests that indigenous populations rely on for their very existence. Our increased reliance on bioenergy, not to mention for hydropower, will be looked back upon as a great travesty of our time. And I actually edited out some stronger language. It's hard to say strongly enough how we fail to recognize this aspect of what we do over and over again. I've been there, I've met with people who had their tribes relocated off of natural lands in Canada. I'm on the phone every couple of weeks or months with people across North America who are facing these challenges every single day, who are facing, armed forces, forcing them off their land. And that's happening in the global south as well, where, the rate of rainforest loss is greater than it ever has been, and it's largely due to bioenergy. And people are being shot and killed, leaders of these groups are being assassinated. So we often, I believe, we often think of our culture's abuse of indigenous people as something in the past, subject to Western movies that long time past, but it's going on today, every single day. So that is why the Sierra Club nationally is concerned about bioenergy, as well as a host of environmental justice groups across around the globe who are concerned about this and unified in their concerns about bioenergy and take much stronger stance than you we have. So I'd urge you to bring in expert knowledge on these issues and be happy to help with that. So now let me focus on the bill itself. And I've tried to identify exactly where in the bill these concerns come up to help you follow me. So the first suggestion regards consumer rights, actually, and consumer education, which I think is really important. I think this is a very complex subject we're talking about. This system that's being set up is tough to know. It's market-based, so you don't have a market unless people really have choices and understand the choices they're making. So to me, this is really important. So it should be clarified that the funder of the clean heat projects owns the credits and brings those to market. So if I fund half of the project, I own the credit. If Efficiency Vermont funds a quarter of the project, they own that credit. If an obligated party throws in some additional funds for an incentive to make it happen, put it over the bar, then they own that credit. And to me, that is going to make it clearer to the consumer what their role is. And let me give you another example. Let's say you have two $10,000 projects, equally efficient at bringing down carbon reduction, so they would have the same credit value. If one of them is accomplished by the homeowner putting up 9,000, and then an obligated party puts up another 1,000 and makes it happen, that's one scenario. Another would be where somebody puts up, homeowner puts up, a couple of thousand themselves, but the obligated party puts up 8,000. I don't know that exact scenario would ever happen, but you can see how there's a very big difference between the two projects. And I'm trying to clarify that the obligated party's role in one is much bigger than the other, and so they get credit for what they do. And then the other piece of this suggestion is that I feel it should be included as some kind of document, call it labeling, that goes along with a proposal and a bill for the project. So the consumer has it well laid out for them exactly how all those pieces are going to play. What's my role? What's Efficiency Vermont's role? What is the obligated party's role? What kind of credits are going to be earned from this, and who owns them? So it's a piece of consumer education that gives the consumer some power in the marketplace. And it actually, without that, I don't think you have a marketplace. So my second item is about the section on early action credits in the bill, page 8 in not yesterday's draft, but the draft, I think it's draft as the bill is introduced. So our feeling is that this section is unnecessary. I think that what I've heard as a rationale for this is that we don't want to discourage people from making these projects happen. We have tons of money going out there right now to make these projects happen. And in the next couple of years, or 2.5 or 3 years, there's going to be no shortage of funding to make these projects happen. So in our view, the incentives are all going to be there. And there are some disadvantages. I think that it would unfairly advantage those providers that are in position to do these things at the expense of people who are not of providers. So it sort of is a distortion of the competition among various providers. The system for measuring and monitoring won't be in place, although I know that came up yesterday a bit. But the most importantly, if you build up early action credits ahead of time for 3 years or 2 years or whatever it is, then once the market opens, all of a sudden you have these unused credits sitting there that are going to flood the market. And if they were created earlier, they're not going to be created once the program starts. So you're going to depress the program once it starts because you have these unused credits flooding the market at that time. So that's really my biggest concern about this. And then maybe there's a way around that, but I don't think there's a way around that that is fair to all of the parties. So that's a concern I have. So the next point I want to bring up is regarding the low and moderate income carve-outs. In other words, the percent for low income, 16% for moderate income. That's as part of creation of credits. It's our view that should be satisfied only by those measures that reduce energy use. So efficiency, weatherization, electrification. When you think about it, if you're trying to, the point of this carve out is to benefit low and moderate income users, right? And if you're filling their tanks with biofuels, great, but you're not helping them in any way. They're still flipping the switch. They're still, tied into that long-term commitment to fuels. And the thing that is going to help low and moderate income people, which they have been left out of to a greater degree than other people, is fuel reduction, is electrification and weatherization. So somebody has suggested maybe it's going to be hard to do that, and so that you have to leave the option for the biofuels. I don't think so. I think, we're talking about small increments year after year. We're not talking about, a third of all the users in the first year. We're talking about, a certain percent, 16 out of 5%. So I don't think it's a huge task. And there are plenty of other places to sell your biofuels if that's happening. So low and moderate income folks should be served strictly by those fuel reduction measures. So the next section, number 4, on renewable natural gas. I'm sure you're familiar with the clause there in the bill that allows renewable natural gas to be included without actually being delivered into Vermont, as long as it has this secure contractual pathway. And we feel that this is entirely inappropriate, and it goes against one of those fundamental claims about this, that we're really reducing energy use in Vermont or reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont. If this secure contractual pathway shows that we're not reducing those greenhouse gases in Vermont. One of the critical things, one of the ways that I think about this is that if you sort of look upstream at the gas we will be getting which will come from drilling and fracking and transmission and storage and all those different stages along the way that we know are problematic, and there are emissions at every stage. How will you look upstream at this secured contractual pathway and capture those emissions that are actually happening? You can't. What are the emissions from gas that never gets here? You can look at the landfill in New York, if that's allowed, and so, well, that's there. But what about that mythical pathway that sort of works its way west and then north and then east again? Are we going to be looking at the emissions that mythically happen from all that? I think this is a way around looking at the actual emissions that happen at every stage along the way. So we think that this is a highly flawed portion. It's modeled on the electric sector, as I understand it, and I have to tell you that there are problems with that too. If you were using your heat pumps last night to stay cool, and the fact is that you were probably getting the energy from that from the regional grid and from as we increase our deployment of heat pumps, what we increase is to some degree fossil fuels. So anyway, I don't want to get too hard on that sidetrack, but it's not a great model to model anything after. So next item on my list is emission scheduling on page 17 in your bill, related to life cycle accounting. And this relates, this is a recent ad based on yesterday's discussion with Dr. Howarth. And here I suggest a couple of things. What you talked about yesterday with Dr. Howarth is what are those additional pieces that need to be added to the GREET model to make it work for us. And I think there are lots that I've only tried to capture a couple of things right here. On my way in this morning, I had made some additions myself, but at least a couple of things that were brought up yesterday were the accounting for methane on a basis of a 20-year average as opposed to a 100-year average, which is currently the practice in Vermont. And the 100-year average just doesn't make sense. I use the analogy that if somebody comes and shouts in your ear, that's pretty loud. But if you think of it averaged over 24 hours, it's not bad. So what matters there? And with methane, it's similar. Methane has a very short, relative to CO2, very short lifespan. It's gone, and most of it's gone in 12 years. It's almost all gone in 20 years. So that first 20 years is its most impactful time. It also happens that the next 20 years are the most impactful time for our planet. We're facing tipping points where climate change and the geophysical systems are out of control. So it doesn't matter what happens in 100 years. What matters is what happens in the next 10 or 20 years. So we strongly believe, and as Dr. Howard said, New York as required by law, that it's a 20-year average. He also discussed the conversion of biogas to renewable natural gas, which is refining it from methane and carbon dioxide into just pure methane, and all of the emissions that go with that, and the how that changes the accounting overall. So I've added that to the list. I would also add conversion of natural lands to energy crops or means a loss in carbon sequestration. So whether it's or whatever kind of natural land it is going to be losing some carbon sequestration. So that should be calculated in.
Anyway,
Thank you, Chairman
Yes.
Bray. Steve, you bring up a point that I have been struggling to understand, so I'm wondering if you could explain it to me. Why would that reduce carbon sequestration if it's a different crop?
Well, if it's just a different crop, it might not. It's agricultural land, right? I mean, it might be a food crop that you're displacing with an energy crop. So that's a real concern. It's less of a carbon concern. But if it's a natural, if it's some of these biofuels that are causing displacement of rainforests, for example, then that's an obvious.
I think what I'm kind of struggling with a little bit with the point that you're making to understand, and we can follow up later, is, I've heard from folks in Vermont who are excited to kind of enter the market if there's an availability to grow crops that would be purchasable for biofuels. So I think I need to understand, is the carbon sequestration reducing if people move in that direction?
Well, it does depend.
Yeah,
I think
so
you made the
that's.
point. It does depend what you're replacing, what you're
Yeah.
displacing.
Yeah.
If it's I'll make something up. I don't know if it's real, but if it's an agricultural field in Vermont, somebody wants to grow hemp for.
Yes, that's, yeah.
Am I guessing? Am I close?
You've almost read the emails.
So I would, I would have to guess it's probably pretty, swap.
Yeah, okay,
but-
but I understand your larger point, thank you.
Thank you. And lastly on this, it's not on my written paper there, but I would urge you to make sure that all the details of the modeling are publicly available. I know this was a concern we had following the work of the Climate Council with regard to modeling. And the models are just, the details of the modeling are not public in that case. And we think that they absolutely should be, and part of the public review of those as the PUC is making its rules and setting up the system. And then let's see, I'm going to try to skip some of these things here for time purposes. Let's see. So one of the things that's been incorporated in this bill since last year is the phasing down of the carbon, what's the word? Carbon concentration, intensity, thank you. The carbon intensity of fuels. And we understand that has value. And that some of the, there are some fuels that would just not make the cut after a while. Some of the most egregious ones. But we're still concerned that there is this kind of global market, and it's the volume of fuel that makes the difference there. And if you are shifting from using the higher intensity to lower intensity fuels, you're still using up gallons and barrels of fuel out of that global market, and it doesn't change, as far as I can tell, it doesn't change that impact on the global market, on the pressure on rainforests, and all those things we're concerned about biofuels.
Mr. Chair, we have used the law, Armed Forces, Agent Orange, and a whole bunch of things to bend things to our way at the expense of others. The only people left to come out after is us. Could you tell us how this bill could be changed with language so we can tackle this problem? Because 2 years from now, we will be talking about the mythical bill that didn't pass.
Well, so just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you toss this bill completely.
Well,
I'm trying to give you specific
I believe
areas here.
everything that you have said this morning
Mhm.
has merit to it, and we heard yesterday. we've got some time to craft a bill that may or may not pass. Help us craft the bill, please.
Well, that's what I'm not sure what I'm missing here. This is my attempt to help you craft the bill.
And my friend and colleague is saying to me, be nice.
No, go for it.
And he would probably tell me at lunchtime, I was nicer than I usually am. But the problems that you cite are problems we heard about yesterday. And while the fossil fuel industry sat, and if you wanted to see a Cheshire cat in this room, that's the fossil fuel industry, the testimony we've got in the last couple of days.
I've been listening.
And what did the secretary of the UN General Secretary say Tuesday? The fossil fuel industry. It says, our core problem is your core product. How do we deal with that? Please help us deal with that.
Well, I believe that's what I'm trying to do here. And I think I'm trying to give you specific parts of the law to change that will improve that. And
Mr. Chair, I'm looking for the changes, not the beating.
His written testimony. I don't know if you have a copy.
I got one.
Yeah, okay, good.
There's,
At least page references, and in some cases language, but so, I mean, specifically here, I would just recommend phasing out the biofuels over time. You know, so for example, we recommend establishing a cap on the % of clean heat credits that can be achieved by the sale of bioenergy, starting at 10% at the start of the program, reducing that to 5% by 2030 and 0 by 2040. So as specific as I can get. And what that would do, now let me relate this to quite your specific point about reducing the fossil fuel use. If you're not getting your credits from biofuels, you're getting them from reducing fuels in general. So this doesn't change the overall cap. It just says, okay, over time, this all has to come from actual reductions in fuel use. So number 7, this relates to the overlap of tier 3 of the renewable energy standard. And there's language in the bill that as I read it, it states that if there are thermal energy transformation projects under tier 3, those can count as clean heat credits. And we commend the work in tier 3, but we feel that if you're giving credit in both areas, then what happens is the fuel buyers who are funding the clean heat credits, that is the end users who are putting up the money to fund the clean heat credits, would be funding tier 3. And it would effectively render tier 3 meaningless to that extent. And so we like tier 3. But we feel, we feel that should continue, and it's great if if the utilities who are meeting their tier 3 requirement also do additional projects in the thermal sector and earn clean heat credits because they've got the programs in place. Why not? So that's great, but any particular project shouldn't get credit in both areas. It should either be a tier 3, it should satisfy tier 3, or it should get clean heat credit, but not both.
So thank you. On that point, so one of the things that we asked the distribution utilities when they were in was if a project could conceivably be in that overlap, would it be stackable? Would the money that they that they would otherwise be spending on tier 3 projects be stackable with money that they would get for the clean heat credits, and or would they just do more projects? And they said that they would be stackable, but I had not considered this other possibility, that the money that they could be getting from clean heat credits could be used to just meet their obligation so they wouldn't necessarily have to spend more
Yes.
on
well,
tier 3.
Yes, and, keep in mind that is their customer's money.
Right, yes.
Right, so the
yeah.
customer bears the costs in all the cases, but tier 3, utility is spending money to make these projects happen.
Mhm,
And there's no return for that.
mhm.
That's just a requirement. In the clean heat credit system, they're spending money, and hopefully go with my consumer protection piece, it's related to their portion of the project. And they would also be, now this, we're talking about let's say Vermont Energy goes out and does an efficiency project someplace, changes some heat pumps. And I'm confusing myself here, I'm gonna have to back up.
That's okay.
But when somebody produces a clean heat credit, let's say a utility, an electric utility creates a clean heat credit, they under the bill, the way it's set up, they could sell that credit on the clean heat market to an obligated party. And at the same time, claim credit under tier 3 for the same
Oh, okay, yeah.
effort. And to me, that it undercuts the value of tier 3. I think, some people call that double counting. I think you have to be cautious about that because it's not double counting carbon necessarily, greenhouse gas improvements, but it is, sort of, it undercuts, to me, it undercuts the value of tier 3. And you might even ask, well, why would an electric utility put out one more tier 3 effort towards automobiles, EVs? Why would they do any more EV incentives when they can get paid for all their clean heat, all their heat pumps?
Right. Yep.
So to me, that's a perverse intent.
Yep.
So I would keep those
Yeah.
entirely separate.
Well, and is your suggestion here that, I'm just seeing that you're recommending that anything required by tier 3 should be retired so that they can't just go on and sell those.
Sell them
credits.
somewhere else, yes. My point number 8 is about the technical advisory group. I think you heard a suggestion about low-income housing and so on before. I would just add that expertise in accounting for sustainability, that is ecological economics, and expertise in greenhouse gas impacts related to those upstream impacts would be really valuable. It might overlap with other expertise people have on the tag, but I think those should be added to the list of expertise that you include. Number 9 is about the public engagement process. There is a clause on page 26. Probably have to turn to it. There's a section that says that if the PUC fails to meet its public engagement responsibility, then that doesn't affect anything. It sort of lets them off the hook. So you require them to do something, but then you let them off the hook for not doing it. And see if I can find this quickly. It says any failure by the commission to meet the specific procedural requirements of this section shall not affect the validity of the commission's actions. And I feel like that just says everything we just said is merely a suggestion and not a law. So I would recommend removing that sentence. And then finally, a few questions where I don't have specific recommendations. and I'll just sort of skim through these. First of all, the default delivery agent. I think sometimes I've heard this described as something that's sort of a last resort, just in case. I think it's going to be a major role. I think, when you look at the fuel dealers coming through here, most of those folks, in my estimation, aren't going to be setting up their programs. They aren't going to be, doing work themselves. They're going to be desperate looking for ways to earn those credits. And I think that the default delivery agent is their go-to source for those. Even if part of the work of the default delivery agency is simply as a broker, the efficiency companies out there doing weatherization register their credits, and the fuel dealers can purchase them there, or there's, in other words, more active. But I think it's worth looking at and thinking about how that default delivery agents really could play a big role. I didn't get a chance to review the testimony from Efficiency Vermont, but I saw that they focused on this a little bit too. So I think that's really worth considering whether there's additional guidance required in setting that up.
Just so there is the PUC has continued to talk with the committee, and I think we'll see more language going in that direction. So there's a true default with an opt-out provision for those who rather not. A lot like the Efficiency Vermont, saying the EU has an obligation to provide those services, but they can sign up for Efficiency Vermont as their delivery agent.
And I think of it partly in terms of the burden is places on those fuel dealers.
So I want to correct that. The obligated parties are at the wholesale level.
Yes.
Well, there's a misconception about what burden, or what I call it burden, or what obligations can be placed on fuel dealers themselves.
Well, I hear that. I believe there are quite a few who do both, right? Who leave the state to get their fuel and come back in. So
Right, but they purchase from a wholesaler, which they all do. It's going to be a wholesale obligation.
So, okay, well, I don't, this is one of those things I don't have to figure out. So I may be wrong, but my sense was that if somebody, if you have a wholesaler that never comes into the state, but then the retailer goes and collects from the wholesaler.
We're addressing that mechanism. So let me just say, we're keenly aware of that.
Okay, good.
And working to have the obligation happen at a level above the retail.
Okay,
So I think, unfortunately, there's been a fair amount of confusion or misinformation circulating about the obligations of fuel dealers themselves.
okay. Good. Well, I just, as a general statement, I think that it's really important. And I also, to me, if you have a problem for fuel dealers, that's also a problem for their customers ultimately.
Sure.
So it's,
I know, but the question is, I don't want the notion of a problem floating out there in a vague way that makes people fearful of what's coming. And the program intends very carefully and precisely for implementation in 2026 to sort all of those relationships out. So I think the notion of problems pending for
Okay.
parties is, it's good to be careful.
Appreciate that.
We want to be prudent, but I think we're going to be careful and prudent. And I think some people have worried about things that the program I
Okay.
don't think will produce.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Number 11 is about fuel bill payer protection. So I'm wondering, is there a mechanism by which low or low moderate income Vermonters can be protected from increases in their fuel costs as a result of the Affordable Heat Act? As this program will simultaneously reduce the amount of fuel sold and increase the amount of required credits those gallons of fuel will increase in price to cover the cost of those credits. And it sounds exponential to me. And you might even add another dimension, which is that the early credits are likely to be the low-hanging fruit, the ones the biggest bang for the buck. So later on in the program, the credits are probably going to get tougher to acquire. They're going to be more expensive. So who pays for those? Well, that cost has to go somewhere, and I believe it will go to the fuel buyers, the homeowners, the businesses that are buying fuel. And if you have fewer and fewer gallons sold, because that's what we're supposed to do with the program here, and you have more and more credits required, and they're going to be more expensive credits, then I think you have a real crunch here. So, and I'll get to a safety valve in a second, but I think there should be some way to, something like LIHEAP, enhanced LIHEAP or something, to protect those low-income users. Now, the safety valve is that is other funding. My sense of this is that this kind of a program is regressively, is inherently regressive, that it puts quite a burden on low-income users and increases the existing burden. So the way around that is by keeping the cost and requirement for credits pretty low. And if we are publicly funding all of the credits, then the cost of this program is zero. Right? There's no need to buy credits, which to me is perfect. Because when we're publicly funding it, generally speaking, that's a more progressive kind of taxation. And it's not, whereas funding through fuel sales is more regressive. I look at this sort of dynamic here with the prices and the decreasing base of sales and the increasing cost as an accident waiting to happen with this whole program. And the way to prevent that is by sustaining external funding. And the IRA is doing a great job of that to begin with. So I don't see this being a problem right away, but over time, sort of with the chaotic systems interacting in an exponential way, things could blow up pretty fast at some point, if unexpected. So that's it. And then finally, my last little point here is I am wondering, what about market entry? Let's say you have a brand new supplier, wholesaler, and a brand new obligated party, and they're just picking up customers without a customer. Now, if you have a business that's going out of business and selling its assets, then that's covered in the bill. But if you just have a new supplier entering a market and picking up customers, their customers being fuel dealers, how is that accounted for in this? And I'm not sure it is. Maybe it is. I just don't quite see how that just works out, but it seems to me it's a.
You say investor, you mean a existing firm that comes into the market or someone who
A brand new
starts
firm.
from scratch?
Yes.
People don't start from, it's very unlikely that people start from scratch. They usually buy someone else out because they got more money than the person they're taking over when they come into the market.
I think there is an incentive for somebody to come in brand new with this program because of the loophole.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a loophole. We track sales over time. It's your prior year sales that drive the obligation. I can say, well, you want to accrue an obligation until you've been in the business for a year, some portion of the year. And I would want to say that absolutely there could be adjustments as the whole rulemaking takes place, where a lot more detail will be addressed. But if we don't create an obligation prior to selling.
Yes, I think that's successful.
Yeah.
So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to follow up with more specific language on anything that you'd like to hear.
Thank you for
Thanks.
that. And,
Do we have time?
pardon me?
Do we have time?
Thank you.
We could do, yeah, something, like, how about just a couple of minutes? We're over by about 15 minutes.
Is it one page?
When you talk about
Whatever.
protecting the final customer, person actually buying heat for their house, okay? It seems to me that the general thrust of this bill is to create a kind of a carrot and stick combination of incentives and disincentives. The incentive to go green, the disincentive to stay dirty. Haven't you just taken the teeth out of the bill? That protections.
Well, I think that's an important question. I don't know a good way to, when somebody's in a situation where their energy burden is, 5 times what it is for a more wealthy person. I don't know, I mean, there are ethical questions to me about how far you want to go with sticks with that person. Because you're increasing the burden. They may not have the opportunity. There may be things in their way to prevent them from making that switch. They may just be at the end of a 2 or 3 year waiting list to get a project done. So there are lots of those kinds of things that fit in. And I just think that we need to protect the lower income folks in the state. And it's an added challenge. I think it's a really big challenge to figure out how to help them move along.
Oh, I understand that. I mean, that's one of the areas of the bill that has troubled me all along. I don't want to approach this problem by whacking low income people. That's,
And this is part of why in the section where I addressed the 16% carve outs for low and moderate income people, let's make those projects all energy reducing projects, not biofuel projects, right? To address that same question, because they could be all addressed as set up by biofuels, and they wouldn't be helped in the least. So, but I think it's very possible to make it work so that they are satisfied with, those energy reducing projects.
So the bill is ambitious in that it sets not only to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but to help correct some inequalities in the current economy. So it's a little troubling to say that our efforts to address inequity as well as greenhouse gas emissions are insufficient. But otherwise, in a way, it's like arguing for the status quo, which I would say is the least equitable solution going. So,
Well,
I'm a believer in partial progress. I'll just fess up to that right now. So,
well, the biofuels for low income folks maintains the status quo.
they could be cheaper. I mean, we did see in Oregon where traditional diesel became more expensive than biofuel.
Yeah, I hope to look at the data on that.
Okay.
I've heard that said. I'm curious to see what the data and how consistent that is. But if that's true, why isn't it happening already? That's sort of what nags me about that. But yeah, I take your point. I have heard that said. I haven't seen any data about it. But getting people, more importantly, getting people off of the fuels entirely or partially anyway, and heat pumps and weatherization projects makes all the sense in the world, as opposed to, and you can always sell biofuels to somebody else, or you can reduce your prices and average it out somehow. But the best thing for low income folks, especially because it's long term, is it's making those kind of capital investments for them.
Well, so the proportions they seem to be off. but the bill does specify that each passive measures have to be infrastructure that's constructed by the
Yes, I would say 100% is what I would argue. And partly, we're talking about only a year's clean heat credits worth, right? So every year it's going to be incremental. It may be 5% a year that, we're drawing down. And so it's 16 and 16% of the 5%. So it's not like all of a sudden the whole market. I think to me, I can't understand why it wouldn't be very doable to line those things up, to kind of shift your priorities towards that. Shift your priorities in terms of heat pumps and weatherization projects towards low-income folks, as opposed to, wealthier people.
Well, there's income sensitivity that's already being offered by various programs. So I would say sufficiently additionally large for lower income folks. That's a judgment call.
Right, and the proof is in the pudding, right? The proof of how large, how sufficient they are is in how effective they are.
Well, thank you again for coming in.
Thank you.
Now we're going to hear again from Mr. Howard. Thank you for coming back to the committee. I think that was referred to as the program's architect. A lot of the underlying sort of bones of the bill came out of the working group that played a crucial role in it.
I think, thanks. For the record, this is Richard Coward. I'm a principal at the Regulatory Assistance Project, and I'm a member of the Vermont Climate Council. And that is correct to share, but I'd like to give credit to quite a number of people who helped to design this program, including the Thermal Task Force, Buildings Task Force of the Climate Council, as well as the many members of the working group and many people who have advised us. And several critical members of the legislature who have really put long and hard thought into this bill last year and this year. I think my job at the moment is to, sort of kick back and look at the big picture and sort of take you through the principal objectives of the legislation. And then I've got only a couple of things to talk about with respect to potential amendments. And then I'd love to just answer your questions. But back to the big picture. Senator McDonald set it up very well a little while ago. Basically put in the UN Secretary General. The problem that we face is that the core business of the fossil fuel industries globally is one of the core problems that we face globally. I hope that doesn't escape us as we try to figure out how to solve the problem that we're addressing today. I'm not a particular firebrand, in talking about corporate malfeasance and what have you, but last year, Vermonters were once again whipsawed by our continuing ride on the fossil fuel roller coaster. Oil heat customers now, everybody here knows this, facing oil bills that are so much higher than they were previously. Meanwhile, global oil companies reported extraordinary windfall profits. You probably all know this too. Exxon last week reported profits of $56 billion for last year alone. Shell and Chevron are doing shareholder buybacks because they don't know what to do with all the excess profits that they earned last year. British Petroleum, BP, which for many years called itself Beyond Petroleum, just reported profits of under 28 billion in 2022. But their response to the climate crisis isn't to say, oh, we're going to use that money to accelerate our Beyond Petroleum activities, but rather to announce that they would slow down the pace of carbon reductions from their prior goal of 35 to 40% by 2030 to a goal of about half that, 20 to 25%. So meanwhile, climate scientists and governments everywhere, including in this legislature, and as Mr. Crowley just said, know that we need to act quickly if we want to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030 and avoid the worst consequences of climate disruption. I heard a report on NPR last week where the reporter ended up by basically stating, the oil industry, however, is in no hurry. Selling oil remains incredibly profitable. Clearly, if we are ever going to escape this endless cycle of spending and polluting, we need a way to reinvest some of those huge money flows back into Vermont, into cleaner and more efficient heating systems. This is what we've learned through our move to renewable electricity. It's what we've learned with energy efficiency. And it's what a clean heat standard would do. So I'm going to make this four sort of big picture structural points. First is the importance of a performance standard. The clean heat standard is a performance standard. It's not a carbon tax. It's not cap and trade regime. It's a performance standard, like the performance standard that we've learned so much from with renewable electricity and with energy efficiency. Many of you have heard the expression, and it stuck with me when I was a regulator. The main thing is to keep the main thing, the main thing. And the main thing here is a workable performance standard that is aimed both at carbon reductions and lower heating bills for Vermonters. That's the main thing. We need to do it to lower heating bills generally, and we need to do it particularly to do so in an equitable way with definite positive inclusion for lower and moderate income households. This bill sets out a path to do that. Now, in case, I heard various people ask me, well, oh, Rich, performance standard, kind of complicated. Why don't we just have financing available for Vermonters to fix up their homes, change out their heating systems? Or why don't we just have a tax and make money available for folks to do things? I was asked to repeat an experience that I had, that many working on this had in the UK, about the problems, about the importance of a performance standard and the problem of relying on financing alone to solve the heating problem. In the United Kingdom, there was a program, a performance mandate on energy companies called the Carbon Emissions Reduction Target. It was focused on carbon emissions and performance standard. And under that performance standard, the utilities developed pretty big and robust programs to help customers save energy. They had grown these programs to the point where they had something like 2 million insulation jobs a year across the UK. A new government came into the UK, and they decided that instead of having a performance mandate on energy companies, they would make financing available on a voluntary basis to homeowners. And they called it the Green Deal. The Green Deal was widely touted as this, let's get away from the performance standard, let's make it all voluntary on the part of homeowners. Long story short, after we were at that point, we had been advising the prior government, and we advised the new government that this program would fail. And many other experts did too. The government said, well, that is inconsistent with the philosophy of this government. We're going ahead with our financing program. Within 1 year, the rate of insulation actually happening in the UK dropped by 90%. The industry collapsed. The businesses that had built their businesses on hiring people to go around and install insulation basically went bankrupt, and they haven't recovered yet. The point here isn't to sort of tell a sad tale about another country. The point here is to remind us of the importance of having a steady, in place performance standard that tells businesses that year after year, this is what you need to do. And there's an obligation on somebody to actually do it. It creates a stable business environment for the folks that we want, whose businesses we want to encourage. It creates job paths and career paths for the employees and the young people we would like to bring into this business. We need a performance standard that charts a path that people will believe in. In the US and in Europe for that matter, renewable performance standards for the electricity companies have done that. They've provided a clear path that we're going to increase the percentage of renewables in our electric supply year after year after year. And because people believe in that, businesses come into being to build wind farms, solar farms. We've seen enormous growth in those businesses because of that. So I just want you to sort of be calm about this, about the decision that a performance standard for clean heat, like a performance standard for efficiency, like the one we have for renewables, is a solid, fundamental decision. Set next point.
Good first point.
The importance of resource diversity. And we're all Vermonters. We want to choose how we heat our homes. Different Vermonters have different ideas about how they want to do that. The housing stock is different everywhere. My house is different than yours. The way I like to sit around the wood stove may be different from how you might like to do something else. Moreover, I do not have a technological crystal ball. I expect that the efficiency of cold climate heat pumps is going to improve. I'm looking forward to it. They're already getting better year by year. They're going to get better. I don't know how fast, and I don't know how soon we're going to have heat pumps that work extremely well in Vermont with the hydronic, baseboard, water-based heating systems that a majority of fossil fuel homes have in Vermont. I just don't know. I don't have an economic crystal ball either. I don't know whether the price of biofuels is going to go down like we were just discussing in Oregon. or whether a new form of biofuels based on cover crops or switchgrass or different forms of cellulosic biofuels. I don't know what they're going to cost, but I know that there's intense research going on to create new and better biofuels. And so I think it's important that this legislation leaves the door open for different biofuels to prove their worth under rigorous scientific standards. And I'd like to be really clear about something. I'm not a particular proponent of biofuels. I'm a proponent of good science. And I'm mindful of the fact that this legislation creates a mandate for making available the best science that we have to evaluate clean heat solutions on a life cycle basis. And as much as I admire the Vermont legislature, I think that the decisions about those detailed scientific matters should be left to the rulemaking process and to the TAG, and that your job is to require that the best science be applied, that it be updated, that it be tailored to Vermont's conditions, and that's what will count. And so we could assemble a group of people who have opinions about particular kinds of clean heat solutions. And there are opinions all over the place, as you've heard. But I think the job of this legislation is to set up a process that subjects all of them to a standards. And we're going to count tons on a life cycle basis. There's also a provision to exclude resources that are proven to have detrimental secondary effects. And that's the role of the legislature, to set up that process. Third point is about progressive protections concerning equity. And here, I think, to be perfectly frank about it, there is a problem with, in lots of legislative endeavors, there's a concern with the perfect being the enemy of the achievable. I agree. I appreciate Mr. Crowley's testimony about equity, and the others as well. And the working group has worked really diligently to figure out how to make this greenhouse gas reducing program as equitable as it can realistically be. And the provisions that are here are our best judgment on that topic. And I guess I would say that when you look at the broad sweep of climate-related legislation around the country or around the world, it's hard to find something that is more progressive than this bill. If you think about it, a cap and trade carbon program just raises the cost of polluting fuels. And without some other measure that involves returning funds directly to the most energy burdened households, it's regressive. Arguments can be made that paying for the cost of highways through the gas tax is regressive. These are serious problems, and I'm not minimizing them at all. But I am pointing out that the positive inclusion of the provisions in this bill to require a progressive fraction of savings to be delivered to low and moderate income households, number one, and to require that a really significant fraction of those be delivered in the form of installations that will permanently reduce homeowners and tenants' bills. It's pretty darn good. And has to be balanced against the following consideration. To the degree that we would focus this bill entirely on solving the problems, the energy burden problems of low-income households, I mean, it would be a different bill. It would be a social equity bill, purely. It would be difficult to simultaneously solve the carbon reduction mandate that's included in our law, and that climate science globally tells us we need to be. So I can elaborate on this, but I should step back a little bit and say, I have not done the economic analysis that would answer the question, how much would it cost to get a 40% reduction statewide while focusing on first installing permanent weatherization, home renovations, and heat pumps in every low-income household. And I'm not, again, I don't want to minimize the importance of social equity in our endeavors here, but the cost of doing it and the degree of difficulty in doing it and the impact that would have on slowing down carbon reduction are all factors that we have to keep in our minds at the same time. So the way I envision this bill working, we have really significant focus on low and moderate income housing in the bill. Really significant focus on a large fraction of those savings being savings that would permanently reduce bills. And at the same time, to the degree that there aren't permanent savings, imagine that a fuel dealer, I mean, you've heard probably from housing project, affordable housing project developers who say that the cost of renovating our building in order to heat solely with heat pumps would be prohibitive. So let's envision that some fraction of the solution for those households is delivered through biofuels or wood pellet stoves, pellet boilers, something like that. If the obligation is on the obligated parties to deliver those solutions to those households, the only way they're going to deliver them is by making them cheaper than the oil heat that they would otherwise be doing. Otherwise, the customers would just continue to buy what they did. So by placing the obligation on the obligated parties to find those customers and deliver those solutions to them, I think we are avoiding the worst impacts that could come from this program on those households. I don't, in other words, I don't buy the argument that the fuel dealers are going to come around to those households and say, well, I'm now raising your price because I have to deliver biofuels to you. Well, they don't have to deliver biofuels to that household. They can just deliver what they've been delivering. So, and if they did need to deliver some fraction of biofuels to some fraction of low-income households, they'd have to make it more attractive to do it. I don't know if this is making sense to you, but one of the problems of that program I told you about in the UK, actually, one of the really interesting, facts about it is that the mandate on the providers was that they had to deliver these savings to customers. And so at first, they were able to do so with customers who were willing to pay a fair fraction of the cost. But then, as the obligation got deeper, they ended up having to tell people, we'll just do it. Just let us get into your attic and we'll give you insulation for free. And so people who needed it to be free could get it for free. That's how the program worked. And we give incentives today in energy efficiency programs for much the same reasons. All right, maybe I should stop on this subject, but I certainly encourage the legislature to do whatever it can do to support the LIHEAP program and to support the weatherization programs through the CAP agencies and through housing authorities as a complement to this. But that leads me to the next question, the thorny question, which is has sometimes been referred to as the tier 3 question. But it's bigger than tier 3. And the answer, I think, is positive and happy one, frankly. The goal of the clean heat standard on the climate side is to reduce emissions according to the GWSA. In other words, we're counting tons. We're counting tons of production according to the schedule set up in the GWSA. From the point of view of the Climate Council or the GWSA, activities that reduce tons are helping us meet that goal. Lots of programs in place today, or to be invented tomorrow. Lots of programs will do that. So that includes weatherization programs that the CAP agencies do. It includes the work of Efficiency Vermont. It includes Tier 3. It includes maybe you or your neighbors who install heat pumps and got a rebate for a couple $100. It will include individual Vermonters who take rebates because of the tax credits now available in IRA, which is terrific. All of those activities, to the degree that they reduce tons of emissions, are helping us meet our GWSA goal. That's all good. What it means is that the remaining gap that has to get filled by new activities under the performance standard that the scope creates, the remaining gap is smaller. The cost of credits is therefore lower. The price impact on Vermonters is lower. So the idea that we want to do something that would make the cost of credits higher, to me, seems backwards. What we want is attainment at the lowest reasonable cost to Vermonters generally, And to the degree that we can make it even better by helping those who are most energy burdened. Right. So, since the goal is 40% reduction by 2030, to the degree that any of those programs deliver savings, we have two choices. We could say any program that delivers savings that isn't implemented directly by a fuel dealer, we could say is doesn't qualify for clean heat credits. And so if we just, I'm doing it with my hands to try to make the wing there. Our goal is 40% reduction. And we say, and that's the purpose of the statute. So if somebody else is doing something underneath that 40%, and we calculated tier 3 delivers about 7%. So we say, well, we're only going to count that for tier 3, doesn't count for clean heat. So those credits can only be tier 3 credits. Well, now we don't need 40% under the clean heat standard, we need 33. Now let's look at the weatherization programs. The weatherization programs, what are they delivering? I don't know, 4%. So now we reduce the remainder like this. But in so doing, we have deprived the weatherization agencies from the money they would otherwise get from the fuel dealers, the obligated parties, to compensate them for delivering the weatherization program. We just say, no, you guys should just totally in a separate category altogether. You have to go on your own steam. Now ask yourself the question, what about a homeowner who decides to take advantage of the IRA tax credits and put in a heat pump? Do we say, first of all, do we know how many that are going to pay? We don't. We don't know whether that 33% now needs to be cut down to 26%. So the remaining obligation on the fuel dealers, forgive me for saying fuel dealers, I'm talking at the wholesale level, but the remaining obligation that remains on the fuel sector is the gap between a quantity X and 40. Quantity X is made up of all the other complementary programs and initiatives and private actions that people will do. And it seemed to us when we were putting this program together that it was far preferable to just say the goal is 40. And anybody who delivers savings can earn credits. If you don't want to earn credits, fine. You can do the action and don't sell the potential credits. But if you do the action, you're entitled to sell the credits to an obligated party. And by including everything, we eliminate all of the arguments about, well, this would have happened anyway, or the weatherization CAP agencies were already doing this, or the housing authority was already doing this. We just say, fine, everybody gets credits for the actions that demonstrably, provably reduce tons according to the schedule. And so just pause right there, say, it's an umbrella. Everybody can get under the umbrella without having to fight over who's in and who's out. It was the conclusion of the working group after lots and lots of conversations that this was better than just arbitrarily deciding, okay, the fuel dealers, the fossil fuel industry will be responsible for 20% of the savings, and we hope the rest comes from somebody else. I'd rather that the obligated parties have an incentive to go out into the world and find the people who are inclined to do things and say, I'll buy your credits.
Thank you. This is very helpful. One of the things that's resonating with me is the idea that ultimately, we want to help save money for Vermonters and at the same time as reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. I think what I am hearing as a trade-off there is that the trade-off is that it might be, well, something we've heard is that it might create an uneven playing field. If distribution utilities are allowed to do that. Do you mind commenting on that? Is that a fair trade-off or is?
I'm scratching my head a little bit.
Okay.
About that. The distribution utilities are required to deliver tier 3 savings. And that's because historically we've been unable to put requirements on the fossil industry. This was a backup plan that came from our inability over the years to put the obligation where it belonged. And the idea that the fossil industry would have to pay an electric utility for doing work that ought to be the obligation of the fossil industry in the first place doesn't bother me.
Okay, fair enough, thank you.
I mean, and this is an important point. I mean, you all are really familiar with this, all of the meaningful carbon reduction activities that we have mandated, we've mandated on the electric companies and to some degree on the Vermont gas. But this is true across the country. It's true in Europe. We did an analysis in Europe, same problem. The taxes and obligations on the electric companies were many times higher than on the fossil companies. And the polluters were the fossil companies, relatively speaking. And I have no problem with trying to right that balance. But keep in mind the other, besides tier 3, the other entities that deliver clean heat credits can also get paid under this program. And that includes the weatherization agencies. And if we want to deliver savings to low-income households, those are the folks that know how to do it. And strengthening their hand, to me, is a really important way to advance the equity goal of this legislation.
Sir, wait.
Thank you, Chairman Bright. Thank you so much for your testimony. I feel like you've helped me you've kind of like synthesized the debate over the last few weeks, so I really appreciate that. And one of the points that I'm still kind of sticky on is a little bit to Senator Watson's question, which is, in the tier 3 situation, are we giving any advantage to the folks who both have a tier 3 and could qualify for a clean heat credit? Is there any unfair advantage they're gaining in this marketplace with how we've drafted the bill currently?
It's not an unfair advantage. It's an advantage that they already have programs running and they have revenue sources that cover it. But those credits will go into the market and they will sell for the market price. The notion that they would sell them at a below market price makes no sense to me.
Yes.
And so if you're competing, if a tier 3 utility is competing against an HVAC company to sell credits, they're both going to get the market price of credits. And the same is true of a weatherization agency. You could argue that the weatherization agency has an unfair advantage that they're getting public money to run their operation. Okay, it's what they have. Is it unfair? I don't think it's unfair. I think we would like to strengthen their hand. So from the point of view of the obligated parties, credit costs like what the market credit, what the credit market would reveal. And if they don't want to pay that price to somebody else, they can run a program themselves.
Thank you, yeah, I think you've hit on the point that I was struggling with, which is the idea that they've already stood up programs or will be strengthened, is that a problem? And I am now seeing a little more clearly on it, thank you. And I don't think it is, yeah.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I think I sometimes have said this is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
We want competition among different providers who can meet these standards. We want them to be out there trying to be smart and deliver low cost savings and then sell those credits in the credit market. And for what it's worth, if you want to kick back to a whole nother level, many people who I've talked to about this kind of legislation who look at it and they see a problem here or a problem there, also have historically supported carbon caps. And under a carbon cap, you would have all of these similar problems that basically think about an electric company under a carbon cap. They have an RPS. Because they have an RPS, they build a wind farm. Because they build the wind farm, they have to buy fewer tons. Making sense? So they're getting the benefit
Yes.
of not buying tons because we made them build a wind farm. And we say, well, that's great. Those two things are harmonious. Yeah, it reduced your carbon obligation, but we made you do it. And we're okay with that. So if you think about the analogy to the current situation, it's like, yeah, we gave the weatherization agency money to deliver savings and they're obliged to do it. And now we're giving them clean heat credits because they did it. Congratulations. Yeah, the programs are complementary, they're working together.
So, I'd like to check out one impression I've had, and I'm going to make sure it's accurate, and that is that obligated parties are, even those engaged in use implementing tier 3 measures don't necessarily implement those measures directly themselves. They go out to a contractor base in order to get that work performed. So the benefits, the increased activity that we're anticipating with the program may very well engage the current private contractor population that's out there and maybe encourage them to grow their business, or new folks will start. Sometimes the impression I get when people talk about, well, the tier 3 obligation is somehow prejudicial because it's going to sequester a whole portfolio of work in their shop, but that's not their business. They just have the obligation to meet a tier 3 obligation.
Correct. I agree with that point that at the ground level, it's the contractors who are delivering the savings. And I guess this is a good time to say, to come back to the basics here. I'm optimistic about the way this program can work because there are diverse ways to meet the obligation. And so I'm circling back on the point about choice and diversity being a good thing. And multiple pathways to meeting the obligation is a good thing. And doing it this way, as opposed to through a carbon cap, allows us to put additional protections in the bill that would not exist under a carbon cap. A pure carbon cap would not distinguish between one biofuel and another biofuel. pure carbon cap would not distinguish between low-income households and non-low-income households. A pure carbon cap, a ton is a ton. In this program, we're counting tons and we're layering in protections for better biofuels to the degree they're used. We're laying in mandates for services to low and moderate income households. Those things are better together than pure carbon cap. And there are a lot of advocates that I've talked to who at least on Monday, they want a carbon cap, and on Tuesday, they want this bill to be perfect. I'm urging you to go forward with this bill because I think this bill is substantially more progressive and more careful than the alternative. You may be aware that along these lines that in some of our neighboring states, they have adopted biofuel mandates without the protections that exist in this bill. New York recently adopted a biofuel mandate requiring 20% blend by 2030. Connecticut has a 50% blend requirement by 2050. Rhode Island has a 50% bioblend mandate by 2030. They do not have in those bills the protections that we have in this legislation. And I have to say, I have a heat pump in my house. As much as I love heat pumps, and my colleagues around the world are promoters of heat pumps, we have to be realistic about the Vermont housing stock, the cost of installing heat pumps, the fact that so many of our systems are hot water systems. I was on the Efficiency Maine is promoting heat pumps really aggressively. You may have heard of them. And they are rightly proud of their success in placing heat pumps. They had a goal of 100,000 heat pumps. They're already at 110,000, I think. And so I interviewed Efficiency Maine, and I asked them, how much do your heat pumps save on oil? They're heavily delivered fuel state like fuel. And the answer is the typical heat pump avoids 25% of the oil heat load in a main house. I went on the Efficiency Maine website 2 days ago, and they're giving rebates for heat pumps, and a lot of people are putting them in, and this is great. I'm not criticizing this at all. But when you look at the calculations for estimated fuel savings that they have on that website, they're telling people that if you take one of these heat pumps, you'll reduce your fuel bill by 25%. And we also know that energy efficiency initiatives delivered in Vermont through weatherization programs, which I also enthusiastically support and have supported my whole career, also save maybe 30% of the heat load of a house, a typical retrofit situation. And the point I'm making here is that we have to be realistic about how fast we can go to zero emissions in the existing building stock of our state. Many of you may have had the same experience that I had, but when I started weatherizing my old farmhouse, my wife and I could afford to weatherize basically one room a year. The first year we did the attic, the next year we ripped out one bedroom and replaced the insulation, et cetera, et cetera. And this is pretty normal. So I think we need to, we need to be willing to accept that what the solutions we're looking for here will often be partial solutions. I think the chair said this, an hour ago. And that's okay. That's realistic. This is an incredibly ambitious program, and we have to accept that it's going to probably be implemented with partial solutions in individual homes and businesses that are going to unfold over time. And the good news, and I think Mr. Crowley said this as well, the good news is on the positive side, we're looking for a pace of change of something like 4 to 5% per year. That's doable. But we're going to need multiple pathways to do it. Okay. I had 2 quick things and then some closing comments. Are we doing okay?
Yes, and you reminded me, I made copies for everyone of the a Washington Post article from a day or so ago about heat pumps in Maine. So, maybe.
Chair, can you take the break at all, or?
We'll, right after Mr. Howard, we'll take a quick break.
All right. I know what that means for me. Okay.
I'm happy to just.
See. All right. The 2 quick things. I think there's this one. Yeah. 2 drafting changes, which I think is pretty straightforward, that came up in our discussions at the working group. The first one, in setting out what you can earn credits for, states that the delivery of eligible clean heat measures can come from both existing and new end-use customer locations. That maybe this goes. This is something that was always assumed. New construction would count too. You can get credit for delivering to beyond code savings that happen in new locations. We don't require you to build the building and then prove it's existing before you can come and get credits for installing a heat pump or advanced wood heat, something like that. If building codes change, then we could change what that means. But right now, we just wanted to include new, and it's pretty straightforward. The second one on 8125F on the emission schedules. This reads in a really a little bit of a complicated way, but actually it's incredibly logical. So I want to take you through the logic. What we're trying to do is establish or calculate the number of credits that would be earned for different actions. And the different actions are, the very first one is not in red, for heating fuels. Now, heating fuels is a term of art in this legislation. It's defined as the fossil fuels. So heating fuels means, we're going to count emissions for those fossil fuels. The second one is any fuel that's used in the clean heat measure, including electricity. So it is intended that we would count the carbon content of the electricity that's running the heat pump. Over time, that'll get better, but we don't want to pretend it's 0. The third is that we will count the emissions associated with a clean heat measure itself, which includes biofuels. So in other words, we're counting the emissions from the fossil fuels, the substitute fuels, the substitute measures, the clean heat measures, which includes even an installation project, and the biofuels. So it's intended to be comprehensive. It reads like, I don't know, it was a little confusing to me the first time I read it, but we actually crafted it to be comprehensive. Yes.
So a lot of concerns about biofuels. So if it takes a 55-gallon drum of diesel to grow the biofuel, that counts against the biofuels eligibility for reimbursement.
Correct. Yeah.
So you have, so by definition, a biofuel that gets credit is, it's only credit, they only get credit for what they've done to get you off the carbon.
Correct. So if, and the legislation says that we're counting tons.
Yep.
We're counting tons on a life cycle basis. That includes what the farmer put in the tractor to grow the crop. It includes the processing, it includes the life cycle. And this legislation is really quite good and comprehensive on that one.
The bill that passed 2 years ago, or the last,
Yeah.
let's say, session.
Yeah.
Required that biofuels, we get an independent group to come back and tell us whether they use more fossil fuels in the creation of biofuels than the fuels. It required that be looked at and be measured as part of the rules.
Correct.
We did that a year ago.
Correct.
And we still got people who come in here and go, biofuels, bad, bad, bad. And you raise the point was, we're not doing credits for any biofuels that are a step backwards, but it seems to fall on deaf ears, or it's just part of the tune that always gets whistled, even though it's changed.
Yeah, this, I suppose, I give credit to people who are concerned about secondary effects. So I'm agreeing with what you just said about how we count. The intention of this legislation is to count the full life cycle impacts of any of the choices that we're making here. I mean, when it's oil, the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions associated with oil include leaks at the wellhead. It includes the emissions at the refinery. That's part of their life cycle. We do the same thing for biofuels and for electricity. Electricity that powers our heat pumps isn't as pure as the driven snow, and we want to be realistic and rigorous about that. And I applaud the legislation for setting up that really high standard for ourselves.
Can I ask a question that really brought to me, and that was talk a little bit about fuels that are processed fuels. So we're not necessarily thinking so much about space heating, but they're nonetheless combusted compression heat that gets used in an industrial process.
Okay, two things about that. First, the ICCT globally, climate plans everywhere, and the Global Warming Solutions Act in Vermont all include industrial carbon pollution as part of the challenge that we have to meet and reduce. So industrial process heat fuels are included in clean heat, are included in the GWSA. The GWSA requires proportionality. We need proportional reductions in all the major sectors, and that's a mandate in Vermont law. this legislation includes process heat, like other heat, among the sources for which we need a 40% reduction by 2030. There are provisions in this legislation that allow the PUC to adjust the mandate to a certain degree when reductions are incredibly expensive or impracticable. I'm not quoting the language of the statute exactly. To recognize, and this was recognized in the context of low-income housing too, that sometimes you just can't realistically accomplish the precise piece of change that would otherwise be required. So there is a safety valve in there for these really hard to reach sectors. I would note that, I mean, pretty much everybody who works in this area understands that high temperature industrial processes are difficult to meet with current heat pump technology. So we can envision, driving our cars on an electric motor. We can envision heating our homes with heat pumps. It's kind of hard to envision making steel with renewable electricity. Although I read recently about some breakthroughs in that area. But recognizing that it is important when people talk about hydrogen, for example, ultimately, in the later years, it would be a mistake to use a precious low carbon fuel like hydrogen in heating homes. It's just a waste of something that's really crucial. What we should be using that hydrogen for is those industrial applications that we couldn't otherwise feasibly decarbonize. So in the future, we're going to be asking ourselves the question, well, where are we going to allocate those? Where will we direct, or where will the market direct those high value fuels to go? And will it be to industrial processes, or will we just blend it in with everything else? My guess is if the market works at all, people aren't going to be blending high value hydrogen into home heating fuel. They're going to be saving it for their industrial customers. And I don't think the legislature needs to mandate that, frankly.
And I have another quick question. I know we're in the middle of the break, so sorry. Thanks for everyone's patience. But it's just like one of those bugaboo questions that comes up. And so maybe you can help us progress this one. People said, well, why the program doesn't incentivize the installation of pure on an oil-fired boiler now, and you could put a new one in that would be more efficient. Why doesn't the program award a clean heat credit to going from one that's consuming 1,000 gallons a year to one that's consuming 700? Can you say something a little bit about the program design and why it doesn't? I mean, someone might opt to do that just because of their wallet, but the program doesn't apply a subsidy to it. And you can say why.
This isn't actually an easy, on the surface, it's an easy question to answer. So I'll give you the quick answer. The quick answer is that we don't want the program to incentivize what is called lock-in. That is why, and this is particularly the case with respect to something like the extension of a gas pipeline system to serve new customers. That's really serious lock-in. Those pipes are designed to be amortized over 80 or 100 years, and we know we don't want to be using them with at least anything that we expect to be available anywhere near that long. So that's the extreme and easy case of lock-in to be avoided. Further up the chain, you have the question about what about just a more efficient boiler or something? The answer there is that these are mostly long life measures. These furnaces are going to last for 25, 30 years, 25 years. And I had one that lasted 40 years, but it was, or by the time it died, it was really a piece of junk. We don't want to encourage people to invest their money that way. That's the answer. I can conceive of a program design that would be a little more fine-grained than that in circumstances where the alternatives really are not available. But I don't think that it's important in this legislation to try to anticipate those pretty rare circumstances.
I'm guessing that efficiency Vermont in its 20+ year lifespan has made adjustments to address circumstances that arose as the program developed.
So when I was a regulator, we were enthusiastically promoting compact fluorescent light bulbs. And I have in my house CFLs. I dated every one when I put it in because I thought, I should know this stuff. So I looked the other day, I have a compact CFL that I installed in 1981. I've got ones from, I don't know, 2001. But we don't do that anymore. We don't get credits for CFLs under efficiency Vermont programs. It's LEDs because they're so much better. And I have to tell you, back when we were promoting CFLs, this goes to my point I made earlier about technological progress, right? When I didn't have a crystal ball. We promoted CFLs. They were good. They saved a ton of energy. They were cost effective. And now we throw them in the landfill. Because what we have now is so much better. Now, frankly, that was a form of lockdown. It was pretty modest, and we actually saved money the first time, and we saved money the second time. I have LEDs now, for the most part, except I keep the antiques for fun. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to know that someone else does something like install the light bulb and puts the date on the light bulb on the year installed.
That's on the record now.
Yeah, I know. It's like I'm outing myself on that one. Okay, so.
Although I may have misspoke. I think 1981 probably is too early. It's probably 89 or 90.
Okay.
So thank you very much for coming back in and helping with some suggested edits as well as to address a lot of the questions that we've been mulling over for weeks now. So, and with that, I'd like to take a break till 20 past, and then we'll pick up and resume our walk through the balance of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Powers.